Good morning, guys. Hey, guys, we're going to roll through 17 real quick. This is not a huge, super big one. Won't see a lot of these probably on the test, to be honest with you, but we'll hit it anyway. It's one that I'm not going to cover in lecture. Basically, I think I've got 10 terms or maybe 9 terms to look up here for you that are answered pretty clearly in the book for you to send in to me. Okay, so don't freak out over that. Let me close some of that. Anyways, I'm getting random emails here. Sorry. But anyway, as we go through this, take a look and we'll walk through this and it'll make some sense out of it. Hang on, didn't mean to do that. Okay, trying to clear that out. Sorry about that. Love it when people start emailing me stuff popping up here when we're trying to do a Zoom. So anyways, I apologize. We are still recording. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go through 17 real quick. It shouldn't take but just a few minutes. So bear with me. I want to get something out there for you. But also, if you watch this, just know that there's not going to be a lot of this on your midterm, on your final. There'll be some multiple choice questions, right? But I'll probably limit them on some of these that are not my favorite chapters. And this is one of those that's not a big high priority one. Okay. And it's actually a pretty short chapter. So it's got a lot of chapters in this book that are not super long, but it's pretty organized. And this is looking at how species evolve. And actually question 10 is probably my favorite one. This is describe the two modes of the pace of macro evolution. Okay. And then of course the first one, define in macroevolution. So macroevolution then is an evolution on a large scale, best observed within the fossil record, involves the origin of a new species, also called speciation. So that is a splitting of one species into two or more species. And the fact that results in two different species of organisms. And if you think about it, I think one of the examples here of evolution that I talked about one time over lunch with my teachers, they thought pretty interesting, is probably our races of humans is an example of the micro evolutions, right? So we had Adam and Eve, or however it started. I'm good with Adam and Eve, come out of a cave, whatever, and they separated out and started multiplying, and they divided, and then they divided their groups, and they went over to different continents, in China and Europe and Asia and all that. And we're not sure how they got to North and South America. We think they walked across the top through Russia and maybe down through Alaska down that way. But and we still don't know how the Hawaiian people got there. Somebody got drunk on a boat, woke up, on Hawaii, I guess. Who knows? But anyway, but what I'm saying is you have all these different races, and races are an example of microevolution because those people in Hawaii have been stuck there for thousands of years, and they have evolved somewhat to adapt to their environment, as would people living in Africa, as would people living as an Eskimo living in the cold Arctic tundra. Okay, and so would they have been, now if we were all isolated for another 100 million years, would they become new species? Maybe. And if that happened and the Eskimo and the Hawaiian were two different species, then that would be proof of macroevolution in humans, or of human species. But we all are one species of humans. We can all interbreed with each other, and we can look and see through genetics, through DNA fingerprinting, that we are all kin to each other, as we are kin to the pine tree, but it's not as close. Okay, but anyway, kind of interesting theory there, thought of it, just a little fun side note. So anyway, we'll just kind of go through this kind of quickly. So nothing much there than speciation, right? Okay, Linnaeus was one of the first to hypothesize that birds and bats should be together in the same group because they have wings and fly. We now know that birds and bats are totally different organisms separated on the branch of the tree of life way earlier. Every species has its own evolutionary history, and all the diversity of life on Earth is originated from the evolution of these new species. So the species concept then must be defined, and we have got 4 or 5 definitions of this. So there are many ways to define a species. The classical one would be one that I always think about. The biological species concept are organisms that can only interbreed with each other, which is coming up. But take a look at some of these other ones. The morphological species concept is based on analysis of diagnostic traits distinguishing one species from another. Species can be distinguished anatomically by one or more distinct physical characteristics. This is the method that Linnaeus used with his binary naming of taxonomy. Most species are described this way. This held for about 200 years, but bacterium and other microorganisms do not have many measurable physical characteristics, so that doesn't work good for bacteria and fungi and viruses, etc. Evolutionary species concept distinguishes species from one another based on morphology. Structural traits, critical traits for distinguishing species are called diagnostic traits. It was used to explain speciation in the fossil record. It implies that members of a species share a distant evolutionary pathway. Since fossils don't provide information about color, soft tissue, or behavioral traits, they're limited. Here's one showing you where this led to the tetrapod organisms with limbs that came out. This is how we think the organisms came out onto the land, right? And then we have the phylogenetic species concept. It's used to identify species based on a common ancestor. It's based on a single ancestor for 2 or more different groups. For you and your cousin and your grandmother would be a common ancestor. And then the biological species concept is population of the same species that breed only amongst themselves. They experience reproductive isolations from other populations. Very few species are actually tested for reproductive isolations. A group of birds collectively called flycatchers all look similar but do not reproduce from one another, and so they are different species. Here's a picture of the leopard frogs living in different habitats. They have different courtship zones and are in actually different species. So look at those, even though there's some overbranch, these are 3 different species of that frog, and look at their sounds, that their reproductive sounds that they call them, the male calling the girls, trying to get them to come hither, is totally different. They're looking at those pictures. Reproductive isolation mechanisms then inhibit genes flow between 2 species. Okay, so this is kind of cool. So how could 2 birds or 2 frogs get separated where they would not interbreed and over time become separate species? Then you got to have these, what we call reproductive isolated mechanisms. These are kind of fun to look at, okay? And there are 2 general types. There are pre-zygotic isolated mechanism, and those are things that happen before the sperm and egg come together, okay? That would prevent 2 groups from getting together, thus leading to macroevolution. And then what happens after the embryo forms? If it dies, or it's called zygote mortality, it dies, and that would stop evolution. Or if this organism, baby organism, if the zygote developed into an organism that was sterile, then that would not allow for speciation. Okay, so let's look at these and make a little more sense when we get into it. So things that would prevent people from, organisms from having sex and having children, right, that are fertile, right? All right, so let's take a look at some of these. We'll look at a couple places. So the pre-zygotic ones are kind of fun to me. And I actually can't help but to kind of talk a little bit about human dating here. So when you're trying to find somebody to marry, boy, girl, whatever, this is there's certain things that prevent you from ever meeting certain people, right? So habitat, where the species occupies different habitat. So if your habitat is church on Wednesday and Sunday, and at home on the weekend, Friday, Saturday night, you sit home and stay and visit with your mom and dad, then you're not going to meet a girl at a club, right? A dancer, okay? A club dancer, okay? So you have 2 different habitats. So you're going to marry somebody at church versus somebody going to the club, going to find somebody and fall in love with somebody at the club. So different habitats can do that. Temporal isolation. Certain organisms want to reproduce at different times of the year. Maybe you're a night owl. Maybe this other girl likes to go out early in the morning and meet people. So then you have different times when you, and we know in the animal kingdom, they go into heat different times of the year. So I'm having a little fun with the human one here. Behavioral isolation, your courtship patterns. If you can't do the right little dance with these birds, or play the right tune, or drive the right car, or have the right clothes on, then you don't get a date. Okay, so I'm crossing over back into humans. But behavioral, animals are very particular about behavioral responses by the way the male or female courtship behaviors. Mechanical isolations, if the genitals won't fit, you can't have a baby, okay? And then gamete isolation would be gametes that fuse together and the zygote has something wrong with it. Okay, a little better picture of it here, looking at birds. We'll stay away from humans. But habitat, species at the same locale, but occupy different habitat. You eat in the top of the tree, and this one eats the seeds. Temporal isolation, species reproduce at different seasons or times of the day or year. Courtship behaviors are unbelievable in animals. Individuals respond to different songs, calls, pheromones, and other signals that trigger reproduction. Mechanical isolation, gametes between species are unsuitable. The sperm can't fertilize the egg, or the sperm cannot reach the egg because it physically can't work. If they can fertilize, you can have zygote mortality where the zygote dies, does not survive, where the hybrid is sterile. And then we have different F2 fitnesses where the individual is very weak and can't survive. Pretty wild. Here it's showing 5 different species of frogs because they all like to go into heat at different times of the year, or reproduce at different times of the year. Oh, my favorite one here, oh yes, I'm going to go the long definition here, but look at this. The elaborate courtship displayed by the blue-footed boobies of the Galapagos Islands to select a mate. The male lifts up his feet in a ritualized manner that shows off their bright blue colors, and if he can't do the right dance, then he doesn't get a wife, okay? Pretty wild, okay? Now, other ones here talks about post-zygomatic isolations. The hybrid is dies. Hybrid is sterile. A classic example of that is when a horse breeds, a horse and a donkey make a mule, and mules are hybrid, and they usually cannot reproduce. So don't buy that mule ranch in Colorado with 100 mules. After about 10 years, you have no mules because they will die. They are sterile. Don't want to go into mule ranching. Okay. So then speciation, the splitting of one species into 2 species then. There are two main modes of this, okay? And they are, it's called allopathic speciation and sympatric speciation. Okay, allopathic speciation is when you have a geographical barrier that separates a group of a like population so they no longer can interbreed, and then they evolve to the environment they're stuck in. Classic example of this are these 6 different, I guess, iguana species of whatever lizards here in California that are separated by the Nevada, the Sierra Nevadas here, okay, by the different ecosystems. So all of these are different species, 2, 4, 6, 7 different species that were at one time of one species, but they got separated by geographical barriers and are great examples of allopathic speciation. Also, we've got the sockeye salmon, socket-eye salmons at the Pleasant Point Beach, Lake Washington, and then the socket-eye salmon and Cedar River, the rivers connected with Lake Washington stick together, and so they are another good example. They got separated up, but they're both there. Sympatric is when you have evolution, speciation, with them living in the same geographical area. There is no geographical isolation, okay? And one of the examples of this is this Midas era cichlid fish. The era cichlids evolved from a population of these cichlids adapted to living and feeding in an open water habitat, okay? And so these, you got a picture of those coming up in a minute. I thought we had a picture of that. It's in the book, sorry. But we see this a lot in plants, the polyploidism, where they will double their chromosome number and then they can only breed with each other. Okay, and there's a couple of examples of this one here showing this. This is a species of plants that has 14 chromosomes, and it hybridizes with another group that had 10 to make a hybrid with 24 chromosomes, and it can only, I mean, it's a new species, right? It can only breed with itself. Okay, this could explain also how, you know, like birds can change the same tree even though they may have the same habitat. Or something genetically happens to them there with the chromosome number. One other cool term here, adaptive radiation, is when we have a single ancestral species that rapidly evolves into new species. This usually happens after some major effect, like a meteorite hitting part of the Earth, and what's left comes in. And here's a great example of adaptive radiation of the honeycreep birds in Hawaii. We know they're all ancestors to one common bird species, and we've got, what, 10 or 20? I'm looking at them here. 3, 6, 11, 19 or so species of birds in Hawaii have been identified, and they're genetically come from a common ancestor. Okay, and then another weird concept is convergent evolution. And this is where you get similar biological traits evolved in 2 unrelated species that are as a result of similar exposure, environmental exposure. Example, bird wings and bats both had a need to fly, and they're totally not genetically kin to each other, but you get the same trait even though they are no longer, they're not even kin to each other. Here's an example of convergent evolution of these 2 species of fish and these 2 lakes in Africa, and they look identical almost, but they're 2 different species that look the same, but they conversely adapted to the same conditions separately. Okay, and then they go crazy here about Darwin and his finches. Is a good read here if you want to about the finches and about the genes associated with that, and they've done a lot of studies on that. A lot of cool stuff here. And coming back to the last big question here, it talks about the pace of macroevolution. Okay, and the evolutionists today talk about 2 paces. Gradualistic is a slow, steady changing over time. Okay, that we can see, and then we'll say, and the other theory is punctuated equilibrium, where you have long periods of no speciation followed by rapid speciation, and then long periods of nothing happening again. So one of them is slow, steady, wins the race, and you end up with 2 species. Other one, ancestor Shazam species 1, and then Shazam species 2, and you got the ancestral species that may still exist. So both of these were kind of figured out to explain some differences we see in the fossil record with different species. But these are the 2 paces of which evolution or macroevolution can occur. Like I said, not a super crazy chapter here, but just yet it is worth looking at. Other ones here talking about developmental genes and macroevolution. This is pretty cool. Research suggests that these genes, these PAX6 genes for eye formation, TPX5 for limb development, and the HOX gene for location of repetitive structures in the vertebrae, these 3 genes have been dated back to common ancestors that lived 600 million years ago, and that all animals share the same control switches for these. So we have the same control switch for the eye, this PAX6 gene, that this fruit fly and this fish and this eye looks like somebody's eye, okay? And here they have taken that gene, the the PAX6 gene, and put it on a fruit fly leg, and you have an eye forming there on this leg. I had to go back and double check what this is. That is an eye forming on the leg of a fruit fly. Wow. Okay. So macroevolution is not a goal oriented, but it is what it is. Nature over time selects for things. The evolution of the horse is a good one to look at. That and the point here is to show that macroevolution isn't goal oriented, and that nature wanted a horse like we have today. It just randomly picked traits that had that, and there's a lot of dead ends that died out. And you can look at this. There are 3 trends that are particularly evident during the evolution of horses: increases in overall size, toe reduction, and changes in tooth size and shape. And take a look at that. So here is the 55 million year ago ancestor looking like a dog or something of the horses. These are dead end paths that didn't make it. And then you get to our horses of today. But we now, in the fossil record, are seeing all these other ones that were pathways that didn't make it. And it wasn't selected for that, it's just what made it. Okay, other ones, human DNA analysis shows that the human genome has 23,000 genes, right? Experts predict that the different gene expression, new functions for old genes or both will explain how humans evolve. We don't think we're going to find any new genes that we have that the chimpanzees don't have, just new expressions are turning on old genes, maybe the difference between us. We are the only other, chimpanzee is the only other organism I know of that has 46 chromosomes. Okay, and that's pretty cool. So it's talking about how mutations of developmental genes occurred a chance, and these random processes may have led to the evolution of humans and chimpanzees different. All right, once again, not a super long chapter. That's that chapter, kind of quick. Don't got a lot with that one, but it does make sense if you read it. It's a pretty cool chapter, I believe. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, and that was about the shortest lecture we've ever had. All right, y'all have a good one, and we'll get to the last 2 chapters and knock them out, okay?